Vamos inmediatamente a pasar a nuestra representante de Belice. Y el tema que nos va a tratar es el estado actual de la enseñanza de la historia en Belice. Se trata del profesor de historia, Delmer Tzib, y quien es coordinador del Instituto Intercultural de Lenguas Indígenas en la Universidad de Belice. Es un apasionado promotor de la historia y la educación histórica. El señor Tzib posee una licenciatura en Ciencias Sociales con especialización en Historia y un diploma en Metodología Educativa de la Universidad de Belice. Tiene una maestría de la Universidad del Pacífico Sur y es candidato a doctorado en educación en la Universidad UNICAF. Su investigación se centra en la integración de la historia y el conocimiento indígena en el sistema educativo formal. Vamos a darle paso al profesor Delmer Jesús. Adelante, maestro.
Hola, buenas. Bueno, aquí estamos todavía de mañana aquí en Belice. Mi presentación será en inglés. Había comentado, un gusto saludarles, pero le había comentado al organizador que, bueno, toda la educación, el sistema educativo en Belice es en inglés. Sí puedo hablar el español, pero se me dificulta en términos de presentación. Entonces, solamente quisiera dar eso, ¿no? Decir eso antes de comenzar con la presentación. ¿Se puede ver mi pantalla?
Sí, si la puede poner en modo presentación.
Ok, ahorita.
Ahora sí, ahí, adelante.
Ok, yo no puedo ver nada aquí en, en mi pantalla.
Sí, pero se
Ok,
está viendo.
ok. Bueno, tendré que hacerlo así. No, no, por alguna razón en mi lado no se ve. Eh,
Ahora
bueno,
se
mi
quitó,
ponencia,
doctor. Ahora
mi,
no
mi-
está.
mi- ok. Bueno, presentaré así. No quiero, sé que estamos un
Ok.
poco urgidos de tiempo. Mi presentación es más un overview, le decimos en inglés, es más como tratando de tener una visión holística sobre la educación de historia en Belice, primordialmente porque, como vieron en la primera imagen de ahí, solo tenemos 43 años de independencia y también eso se traslada a nuestro proceso de enseñanza de historia. Em, so I would like to formally begin my presentation. Again, thank you for the invitation. Assistant Professor Christopher De Shield argued that the arts and humanities are central to Belize's emancipatory process at a public lecture on the role of education in Belize's decolonization. He suggested that education is an essential tool to eradicate mental slavery and promote economic and social upliftment. In his analysis, De Shield critiqued the prevalent global product-oriented approach to education, which focuses on achieving specific outcomes or products, often at the expense of holistic learning and critical thinking. He claimed that historical awareness, critical thinking, and big thinking should be significant aspects of Belize's decolonization agenda. Although the Shield mentioned historical awareness, little was said about how it is taught in Belize. This presentation expands on historical awareness as a substantial aspect of decolonization and national development. It proposes that the state of history teaching in Belize reveals the need for a broader consideration of history for forming national identity, post-colonial development, and the perpetual process of decolonization in Belize. This exploratory paper addresses the critical state of teaching history at all levels in the Jewel, as Belize is known. The author argues that history teaching in Belize is poor, evidenced by its relatively limited consideration within the national curriculum, inadequate teacher training, and limited historical research, which hinders Belizeans' understanding of national identity, historical processes, and global historical context. The poor assessment refers to historical teaching, including content, methods, and research quality. This assessment also takes into consideration the concepts that Tan calls substantive historical concepts and procedural historical concepts. I will start first with a historical backdrop so that we understand the history of history education in Belize. Belize's education system has its root in colonialism. During the colonial period, education in British Honduras, as Belize was known, was designed to meet the economic and administrative needs of the empire, focusing on producing a small educated elite while neglecting the broader population. The early education system was heavily influenced by religious institutions, which played a crucial role in shaping the curriculum and maintaining a focus on European history and values. This system, known as the church-state system, allowed churches to have significant influence over education policies and curriculum content. Even up to today, around 60 to 70% of the schools in our country are managed by religious institutions. During Belize's early history, the first schools in British Honduras were created to primarily cater for the need of the elite and empire. From the 1920s to 1940s, the curriculum remained on technical fields and agriculture to satisfy the economic needs of the colonizer. The courses remain Eurocentric with limited inclusion of local and regional history. When Belize achieved self-government in 1964, there was a strong push to Belizeanize the education system. The effort focused on incorporating history into the social studies curriculum, but the content was still very limited and to an extent repeated some of the colonial narratives. Some schools such as Muffles College in Orange Walk, St. John's College in Belize City, independently sought to include national narratives and question the colonial accounts. However, the process to include history remained sporadic, limited, uneven, and insufficient. The contents were preferred within social studies, and therefore history became only one aspect of a series of other topics that needed to be covered within social studies, within the scope of a wider curriculum that required the teaching of math, English, among other subjects. After Belize gained independence in 1981, Belizean educators and activists advocated for a national history to be included within the curriculum. But this national history was a contested arena. Some remained focused on the colonial narratives, while others sought a decolonized version of the story. Let's remind ourselves that some people in Belize wanted independence, yet there were others that opposed it. In 1983, an explosion happened. Explosion is used here in a figurative way, primarily because a book was published by the name of A History of Belize, A Nation in the Making. This book, for the first time, presented a very critical view of colonialism and introduced an alternative perspective. Up to 1983, most of the narratives were showcasing that slavery, quote unquote, was not so bad in Belize and that the slaves were, quote unquote, happy. The book was accepted by some, but it was also criticized by some. In fact, there were accounts, or there are letters, records that show that some people were sending formal letters of complaint to the government for allowing a book like this to be used in the curriculum. By 1991, pre-colonial history was being taught in schools, and in 2000, the government clearly outlined policies that included Belizean history within the social studies curriculum. Academics continued pushing for the inclusion of history, and in 2004, the African and Maya History Program was conceived to put national history in the social studies curriculum. Moving forward to 2018, the government formulated the Belizean Studies curriculum for the high school and primary school levels. Its curriculum aims to integrate history within other disciplines such as anthropology, geography, and sociology, focusing on Belize's development in a global context. The national curriculum framework includes history within the Belizean Studies curriculum, requiring 180 minutes per week at the secondary level. However, history is still largely integrated within social studies rather than being treated as a separate discipline. This timeline encapsulates the gradual and ongoing process of integrating history into Belize's curriculum, reflecting the country's journey towards decolonization and the formation of a national identity. After Belize gained independence in 1981, the legacy of colonization persisted, and changes to the curriculum were slow and met with resistance. The education system continued to reflect colonial values, with a curriculum that was only superficially altered to include local content. The primary and secondary education systems incorporated history primarily within social studies, which included topics of geography, civics, and history. In fact, currently, there is a large push towards including civics education within the curriculum framework that we presently have. However, history has not systematically been given a space as a discipline at the primary and secondary level. The education system in Belize, just to give an overview, is structured into 4 different levels. We have the pre-primary level, the primary level, the secondary level, and the tertiary level. So we follow a British system, with history being included at various degrees in the various stages. At the primary school level, history is taught as part of the Belizean Studies curriculum, which also includes geography and civics. The focus is on introducing students to Belizean history and identity, but the content is limited and there is little emphasis on historical methodology or historical thinking and consciousness. The recently introduced Belizean Studies curriculum at the primary level includes topics related to African and Maya history, but the distribution of history content is uneven and the time allocated to history is relatively low compared to other topics within Belizean studies. The analysis shows that when you assess the learning outcomes for Belizean studies within the primary school system, only about 35% of the curriculum is dedicated towards history. The approach of Belizeanizing the education system through creating a course to teach everything about Belize has become problematic. It, to an extent, obscures some of these very valuable methodological practices that are included within history. When we shift our attention to the secondary level of education, at the secondary level, history is again included within the Belizean Studies framework, which aims to provide a comprehensive understanding of Belize's history, culture, and society. The curriculum is organized thematically, with history being a significant component in the first and second forms. But as the students go to third and fourth form, it gradually diminishes in importance in the later years. It is worth noting, though, that our secondary system is also, to an extent, aligned to the Caribbean. Therefore, some schools offer the course Caribbean History as an elective in the third and fourth form levels, which prepares the students for the Caribbean Examination Council exams, CXC. However, the emphasis on history varies across schools, with some prioritizing other subjects. Relatively, at the high school level, students that choose the path of Caribbean history at the third and fourth form level are very few. At the tertiary level, our system is organized with junior colleges and universities. In junior colleges and universities, history or Introduction to Belizean History is part of a set of courses called the General Education Courses, or GECs. The GECs are courses that all students, regardless of the program that they're studying in, must take. Most institutions require students to take an introductory course in Belizean history, either 1 or 2, but there are only a few programs that are dedicated to the history or the teaching of history and creating historians in our country. And to say a few, I mean only probably about 5 programs across the nation. And we're talking about associate level programs and also bachelor level programs. Just to note, the University of Belize offers the only bachelor degree in social science with a major in history in the country. However, the program also is experiencing low enrollment and a steady attrition since 2015 to 2024. And the program faces challenges related to funding, resources, and attracting students. In addition to that, the problem of maintaining the history program alive and open is also faced with the nature that there is a lack of professors in history. There is a lack of trained people that can teach the course as well. What is worth noting as well is that the programs are totally, or the history program at the university is totally focused on forming history researchers, lawyers, and perhaps public servants. But there is a huge lack of training history teachers, history educators. In fact, students that would go through the program at the University of Belize would have to do their bachelor's in history, and then they would have to go and also do a separate diploma in education for them to get a license to teach at the secondary and primary level. What this shows you is that the current curriculum in Belize reflects an ongoing struggle to define the role of history within a broader educational framework. The inclusion of history within the Belizean studies curriculum at both the primary and secondary levels shows an effort to incorporate Belizean history into the education system. However, this inclusion is often superficial, and history is not treated as a separate discipline and with its own methodologies and approaches. So what are some of the challenges? One of the major challenges in history education in Belize is the lack of trained teachers. The number of teachers with degrees in history or social sciences is very low. In fact, the history program at the University of Belize has only been able to graduate about 73 individuals. Many of the teachers who are tasked with teaching history at the secondary level in particular do not have a background in the subject. This has led to a lack of rigor and depth in history teaching, particularly at the primary and secondary level. The lack of pedagogical training in history has become a significant challenge to teaching history in Belize. In addition to that, the curriculum development process has been influenced by various political and ideological factors, which have hindered the consistent and effective inclusion of history in the education system. The discontinuation of the African and Maya history program, for example, reflects the challenges of maintaining a focus on history in the face of changing political priorities. Do we want to decolonize? Is perhaps a question that we should be asking ourselves in Belize. At the tertiary level, the inclusion of history in the curriculum is limited. Most students are required to take a general course, but there are very, very few programs that specialize in history itself. The University of Belize's history program, which was established relatively not too long ago, in 2009, aims to address the need for historical research and education in Belize. However, the challenges faced by it has forced the program to undergo a series of changes that would make it more relevant to the Belizean society. Despite its program, the program's potential, it has struggled to attract students and to maintain a stable cohort. The history program has also faced challenges that limit its production because there is a limited pool of faculty that can serve in that particular capacity. As we speak, the program is undergoing what is called a program review process to enhance its quality. It is exploring ways in which we can serve the Belizean society and make history more attractive for Belizeans on a whole. One of the major criticisms of the program is that the program has a very strong theoretical base, and our nation needs practical approaches as well. Therefore, what we have been doing is that we've been exploring the market to see what courses we can include within the history program. So focuses or courses such as oral history, public history, approaches to digital history as well have been part of the discussion.
Le quedan 4 minutos.
Okay, sorry.
Gracias.
The production of history research in Belize is limited, and there is also a need for more investment in research that can inform the teaching of history at all levels. The lack of research and teaching resources has contributed to a vicious cycle where the low emphasis on history in the curriculum leads to a lack of interest and investment in the subject. Institutions such as the Institute for Social and Cultural Research, the National Institute of Culture and History, and the Belize Archives and Records Service have played a role in promoting historical research and in engaging with international and national researchers. However, the overall production of Belizean history research remains insufficient to meet the needs of the education system and the broader society. The assessment of history teaching in Belize reveals significant challenges to the structure of the education system, the inclusion of history in the curriculum, and the broader societal attitudes towards history. Despite efforts to Belizeanize the curriculum, history remains underdeveloped as a discipline, and there is a need for a robust and consistent approach to history education. To address these challenges, Belize needs to invest more in teacher training, curriculum development, and historical research. A renewed focus on history education is essential for fostering a historically conscious society that can contribute to national development and decolonization. The move to focus on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics needs to consider the arts. It cannot be STEM, it has to be STEAM. What role does history play in formulating Belizean history or Belizean nationalism? As a concerned first citizen, educator, and historian, I am seeking also ideas on how we could enrich our programs in Belize. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, excelente. Queremos saber si hay algunas preguntas aquí en los mensajes para la representación de Belice con esta interesante exposición, aunque fue en inglés, quizá para muchos de nosotros no se pudo, pero como estará disponible, estará grabada, pues ahí tendremos la oportunidad de disfrutar de esta interesante disertación del profesor Delmer.